I've called today's lecture Teaching Literacy, and I've chosen that title because although it's focused on the teaching of reading, I'm trying to show the students how reading and writing are mutually beneficial, how one impacts positively on the other. Good morning everyone, and welcome to this session which aims to revise some key messages from the English course and to explore in some detail the simple view of reading. I want to start with reading because it's really important that you understand the process of reading. Literacy is central to the primary curriculum. The primary curriculum is predicated on children's ability to read, write, speak and listen. So we need to be very clear about what reading is. And this quote from the Cox report is very helpful. It says, "Reading is much more than the decoding of black marks upon the page. It's a quest for meaning and one that requires the reader to be an active participant." Bit of a mouthful, so I might say reading is an active process of getting meaning from print. Reading is always a message-getting activity. There are two aspects in the reading process. Decoding, word recognition, those high-frequency words, and the comprehension of what's being read. So I'm going to demonstrate these two aspects with this passage, and I want you to read this passage to the person next to you.
It must be fairly obvious to anyone reading this that readers draw their knowledge of how language works, their ability to recognise words on sight, and their capacity to use contextual clues to enable them to make sense of what has gone before and predict what is coming next.
It must be fairly obvious to anyone reading this that readers draw on their knowledge of how language works, their ability to recognise words on sight, and their capacity.
So you can see that all the time, as fluent, skilled readers, you're reading for sense, you're reading for meaning. That's exactly what you want to be teaching the children in your class to do. Every time they read, they're searching for the meaning that the author intended. So when we think about these two aspects of the reading process, we express them as an equation. And we express the equation in multiplication terms. We use multiplication because the product of multiplication is always greater than the sum of addition. So if we look at decoding with no comprehension and you multiply those together, there's nothing, there's zero. Similarly, if there's no decoding but comprehension and you multiply those together, there's nothing, there's zero. There's only reading when decoding, the word recognition, the high-frequency words, the phonic knowledge is multiplied with the comprehension to make reading the product of that process. So we're moving on now to think about the simple view of reading. On your whiteboards, I want you to write the two dimensions of the simple view of reading. Please don't show your whiteboards till I give you the signal. Everybody ready? You have to be quick. 3, 2, 1, show me. Excellent. Anna, can you tell us what you've got on your board?
I've got language comprehension and word recognition.
Who else has got language comprehension and word recognition? Show me with thumbs up. Excellent, well done. Clean your boards, please. And it's the Rose Review that gave us this model of reading and the wording of the model of reading, the simple view of reading. This model has two axes. First axis is about word recognition, decoding children's phonic ability. The second axis is about language comprehension. we see 4 different types of readers mapped on to this model. And Mandy, Sarah, Jo and Sarah are now going to make a human version of the simple view of reading. Where's your ribbon? There we go. Do you need to come this way slightly, I think? You're all right, Sarah. Okay, so now we've got a human version of the simple view of reading. We're going to now listen to 4 case studies. I want you to listen very carefully to these case studies. I want you to imagine that these are children in your class in September, because I want you to map these case studies onto the simple view of reading. I've got Joy, Julia, Tim and Susie. Listen carefully and assess these learners.
My teacher says that I struggle to read even simple texts. And my teacher says that I don't seem able to discuss the books I've read, or answer questions about stories I've heard, or talk much about things that have happened to me.
Thank you, Joy. Here's Julia's case study.
My teacher says I read slowly and I don't always get it right. But my teacher also says that I enjoy discussing stories and that I'm really good at remembering all the details of what's being read to me, and that I'm really, really good at remembering what I've seen on TV and everything that happens in our class.
Thanks, Julia. Here's Tim's case study.
My teacher says that I can read accurately and quite fluently, and I have a good knowledge of high-frequency words. But he also says that sometimes I'm not able to remember what I've read or what's been read to me. He says I don't understand a lot of the detail of the stories he reads to the class.
Thank you, Tim. Here's Susie's case study.
My teacher says I read a lot from the reading scheme and from my favourite Dickens Smith books. My teacher also says that I can talk in a formed way about what I've read. I really like books. And that I play a full part in class discussions about books and literature. And I can build on what other children say.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask Emma to come and put Joy in the right place in this model of the simple view of reading. Keep watching to check that Emma puts Joy in the correct quadrant.
Into this one, I think, just with the 4-word recognition.
Thank you. And now Vicky is going to move Julia and put Julia into the correct quadrant. Thanks, Vicky. Lisa, can you come and move Tim to the right place? And of course, what you'd say to your class is, keep watching, keep checking. Do you agree? You might even say, show me with thumbs up if you agree, show me with thumbs down if you disagree. And Sandra, can you put Susie in the correct place? And you might think, well, it's obvious, isn't it? But you need to keep thinking, is Susie going to go to the vacant quadrant? Okay, thank you very much. Just to check that we've got our case study learners in the correct quadrant of the simple view of reading. I want you to keep these learners in mind while we carry on through this lecture. Keep thinking about how you're going to move Joy and Julia and Tim across to the quadrant of good language comprehension and good word recognition. And also, how are you going to maintain and develop Susie's enthusiasm and reading skill? Thank you all very much. Thank you to my volunteers. You can take your hats off now. The next part of the lecture includes a game show, a literacy game show. I use a lot of quizzes with students, and I think it's important that the students see that they could use that approach, not a test or an examination, but a quiz which taps into children's competitive instincts, gets them working together in a collaborative way to answer the questions that the teacher sets. There's the opportunity there to tap into popular culture, maybe to base the game show on something that's popular from TV, for example, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. That sort of format will always work well with children in the classroom. And now we've got a quiz. We've got a literacy game show. And I need an assistant. Here's Susie, who's going to be my glamorous assistant. And the topic for the 3 rounds of this game show is the context in which you'll teach reading. So here we go with round 1. Round 1 is about shared reading. Shared reading, A, is a small group activity. B, shared reading involves an adult and a child reading together. C, shared reading is a whole class activity. Or D, shared reading is reading with a partner. Okay. And Neil?
It's C, a whole class reading activity.
Do you agree with Neil? Yes. Thank you, Neil. Every time you see the word shared applied to reading and to writing, it means you as a teacher working with the whole class. Okay, round 2 might be slightly harder. Round 2 about guided reading. A, guided reading involves children reading one section each in turn around the group. B is a whole class activity. C involves the children reading together in unison, like chanting. Or D involves children reading independently at their own pace. And who's going to answer round 2? Emma.
D, children reading independently at their own pace.
Thanks very much. And our final round, round 3, also about guided reading. Guided reading is taught in A, friendship groups, B, mixed ability groups, C, same ability groups, or D, same gender groups. Looking for Yvonne will answer round C.
It's C, same ability groups.
Yvonne, why is that?
It's so that they can learn from each other and access the text together.
Thank you very much. Really important in guided reading that the children are more or less at the same level, so you can choose a text that's appropriate for them at their level, that your teaching hits the mark for the children in that group. It's much more time effective if you teach children together in a group. As Yvonne says, they learn from each other and you as their teacher. Thank you very much. That's the end of the game show. So just think about the model for teaching literacy where those contexts for teaching will occur. What we want is that first-hand experience, that reading, talking and doing at the start of your teaching, so that the children are involved before you move into modelling and demonstrating through shared reading and shared writing, where you'll do teacher scribing and supported composition when you're teaching writing. Then you need that supported, scaffolded stage. And all that leads in to children working independently. What we're aiming for is that children will read and write independently. But it's your teaching and the way you structure your teaching that enables them to be successful when they read and write independently. The next part of the lecture focuses on the teaching of phonics, and the Rose Review has made the teaching of phonics very central to the teaching of reading. So exploring the simple view of reading, focusing on the strand of word recognition and phonics, I've introduced 3 different games which I want the students to look at in a critical way so that they could take them away and use them in the classroom. I'm demonstrating some possible activities for the teaching of phonics. So now we're going to look at the two dimensions of the simple view of reading in a bit more detail. We're going to focus, first of all, on the axis of word recognition, phonics, and decoding. When you're teaching phonics, either as an early years practitioner, observing the children in your early years setting as they make progress towards the early learning goal for linking letters and sounds, or when you're a Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 teacher, planning your literacy work from the Primary National Strategy, Primary Framework for Literacy and Mathematics, you're going to be thinking about both these axes. The phonics axis relates to two of the strands of the 12 strands of literacy. Strand 5, word recognition, decoding, and strand 6, word structure and spelling. So it's those at Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 that you'll focus on when you're teaching phonics. So let's think about phonics. Phonic teaching involves the ability for children to understand the alphabetic code. Children need to understand and recognise that we use print to encode a message. That's a conceptual breakthrough when children understand that and come to realise that. They also have to have the ability to segment phonemes for spelling and to blend phonemes for reading. It's really important that you can use the technical vocabulary confidently. Really important that you can use terminology like phoneme and use it accurately. So what is a phoneme? A phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in a word. It might be represented by one letter. In CVC words, each phoneme corresponds to one letter, to one grapheme. However, there are many words where that relationship isn't so simple, isn't so direct. If you think about the word high, up high, not high, and you think about the I phoneme in the word high, you hear one sound, one phoneme, but it's represented by 3 letters, I, G, H. It's really important in your phonics teaching that you articulate phonemes accurately. It's very easy to slip in an extra sound, that sound at the end of a phoneme. Very easy to put a schwa, an unvoiced vowel, at the end. You sometimes hear people saying n. You could spell that N-U-H. But we don't say n, we say m. You don't say m, you say m. You don't say s, you say s. Excellent. So let's test your knowledge of phonemes. I want you to tell the people around you and write on the whiteboard the number of letters there are in the word phoneme. That shouldn't be a problem. And the number of phonemes that there are in the word phoneme.
Okay, 7 letters, phonemes, 5 phonemes.
So everybody agrees, 7 letters, and you can hear 5 phonemes. What does it tell you about principles for teaching phonics? Talk to the person next to you and record one principle for teaching phonics. It's really important for you to hold in your mind.
Spelt in more than one way.
And to speak clearly. Yeah, but if you speak clearly as well, you don't put extra sounds.
Just so that.
Okay.
Three, 2, 1, show me. Excellent, very good. Dave, can you tell us what you've got on your whiteboard?
Yeah, there's no direct relationship between the number of letters and the number of sounds in a word.
Thank you very much. Someone else had a good one over here. I think it was Gemma.
We said that sounds can be represented in more than one way.
Have you got an example of that?
We use the example I. For example, you've got the word I as a capital letter, or IGH, IE, and there's many others.
Thanks very much. So we've got these principles for teaching phonics, covered several of them. Think also about the letters, the graphemes that you see. Think about the O in phoneme, sounds like an O in phoneme, but you see that same symbol, that same letter. In other words, it's pronounced in a different way. So the message is that you must be flexible in the relationship between letters and sounds. There are approximately 44 sounds, phonemes in the English language, which we encode in 26 letters. So your teaching must never imply one letter, one sound. Flexibility from the beginning is really important. Okay, we're moving on now to think about the instructions that you'll give to children when you want them to use their phonic knowledge. You hear lots of teachers say, sound it out. We don't want you to say, sound it out. We think that that results in isolated units of sound which are separate. We want you to say something like, blend the phonemes, blend the sounds. I heard a teacher say, smooth the sounds together. That's a really nice way of showing how to blend. I heard a student say, run the sounds together. That's a good instruction, helps the children to know what to do with their phonic knowledge. What else could you say? Could you fill in the empty speech bubble? Vicky.
We had examples of squash or squish the words together so they know they had to be all together and, sound them out.
Really nice. I like the idea of that squashing and squishing them. So you're bringing them together very quickly. Thank you very much. Okay, so when we're thinking about high-quality phonic teaching, we know it's multisensory. It is not worksheet-driven. It's discrete and it's daily. Needs to be regular in order that children acquire the skills that they need. Has to be well planned, as does all your teaching. The Rose Report says that phonics should be the prime approach to decoding unfamiliar words, because all your phonics teaching is aimed at fluent and fast word recognition, and it needs to be systematic. We're recommending to you programs for the teaching of phonics which follow children's developmental learning sequence. Children hear and say before they have the ability to read and write. So you're looking for a phonics program that starts with children's ability to hear actively sounds in their environment and play with language in terms of rhyming, alliteration, onset and rhyme, to hear and discriminate sounds in words, and all that happens before letters are introduced and attached to phonemes in a formal way. So the first set of bullet points equate to phase 1 in letters and sounds. There are no written symbols in phase 1 of letters and sounds. In letters and sounds, the graphemes, the letters, are introduced at phase 2. So let's have a look at hearing phonemes in words. Let's have a look at the idea of children being able to hear and discriminate individual sounds in words. You always want to start with something familiar, so why not start with children's names? Start with the names of the learners that you're working with. So here we've got a set of learners who I'm working with. And we're playing the odd name out. Now, it's really important. It's not the odd one out, not the odd person out. It's the odd name out. You need to make it clear to the learners that today you're focusing on the ability to hear something the same about all these names. So we've got Rachel and Rosina and Regina and Raj and Fiona and Rachel and Roxy. Your articulation has to be very helpful to enable children to hear and to be able to discriminate the difference between the words you're saying. So now let's think about how children are going to blend phonemes together at a later point in their development when you've introduced some sound-symbol relationships, some phoneme-grapheme correspondences. I'm going to have Susie, Hyacin, Joe and Anne to play a full circle game. Hard to say. No idea until it goes next to upside down. Okay. So, full circle is a generic game. You introduce it so that children understand the process of playing the game. And once children understand the process of playing the game, it can be used in a range of different contexts. So it's worth your while to invest your teaching time in activities where you've got a great payoff. So while we're watching a very early version of Full Circle, please think about how you could develop this, how you could extend this, other contexts you could use it in. Okay, so you probably start off with recognizing these graphemes, these sounds, and we probably have to say those in turn. The first word we're going to make is the word sat. Can we make the word sat? Okay, so we've got our first word, sat, and probably you get the children to read it together, probably identify the phonemes in turn, and then you'd say, we're going to change sat, and we're going to make the word sit. Who could make the word sit? You get the idea. Then we're going to change it and make the word sip. We make the word sip. While you're doing this, you might want the children to think about the blending process. So you might say, put the letters very close together. Stand close to your friend. You might say, hold hands with your friend to make sure that these phonemes are blended together. Now we're going to change, can you make the word tip? And the next word is tap. Carry on. I wonder if we could make the word sap. Sap. And all through this activity, you would be blending. You would be checking the children were able to blend. Have children coming up, running their finger under the words, pushing them together, making their friends hold hands, until you get back to the word sat, which is full circle. So let's make full circle. Put the letters together, and we make the word sat. So that's full circle. Thank you very much to my volunteers for the full circle activity. That question I posed you, how could you extend that? Once children understand that there's a sequence of words, you go from the original word through a range of words back to your original word. You could use it with CCVC words or CVCC words, or you would be working towards children's ability to place a full circle independently. Go from sat to sat in 6 moves in your group and then come and show us, the rest of the class, how you did that. Once the children know how to play that game, then they're able to do it independently. All your phonics teaching is aimed towards the application of children's knowledge on meaningful texts. You don't want the children in your class to know all their sounds, but still not to be able to read. So at every stage, you must apply what children know to meaningful texts. You need a range of ways of engaging with big books. Using post-it notes to mask words is a really effective way of doing it. Here's Mr. Gumpy's outing. This is Mr. Gumpy. Mr. Gumpy owned a boat and his house was by a river. One day, Mr. Gumpy went out in his... Well, aren't you clever? How did you know that was the word boat? Because I've covered the word boat up. If it's the word boat, what sound can you hear at the beginning of the word boat? So what letter would you expect to see? So then you can really ham it up and have some drama about, shall I peel the sticky away? Who'd like to come and help me? Shall we see if it's really the letter B behind here? And so on through the word. You could blend the phonemes through the word in sequence. Using post-it notes to mask words is a really effective technique. Makes your teaching of reading with the whole class interactive. So moving on to the second axis of the simple view of reading and focusing now on language comprehension. In the primary framework for literacy and mathematics, it's strand 7 and strand 8 that encompass this aspect of your teaching. Strand 7, understanding and interpreting texts, and strand 8, engaging and responding to texts. And we're going to see a video extract of a Year 2 teacher who's using this book, Grace and Family, another story about Amazing Grace. While you're watching this extract, I want you to look out for 2 things. I want you to look at the aspects of that model that we spoke about earlier and map what you see onto the model. But I also want you to think about, if this was your Year 2 class, what would you be planning to teach them next? The lecture today finishes with a focus on the language comprehension aspect of the simple view of reading. We're using a Year 2 teacher who's showing the model of teaching literacy, which we've used with our students throughout the course. And I'm hoping they're able to recognise in practice the theory that we've been introducing to them. We use a lot of video extracts because that enables us as lecturers to bring the classroom onto the campus and enable the students to look critically at teachers working with children. So bear this model in mind. Think about this model, think about what you see the teacher in this Year 2 class using from this model, and also what you would teach next.
Word, map.
In this extract, the teacher's using a range of interactive techniques to prepare the children for the writing she wants them to do later on. The aim is to promote a really deep engagement with the text that she's chosen and with the characters in that text.
Last year I was involved in the whole Power of Reading project, and that basically completely changed my whole idea of how I teach literacy. We had a look at a book all about Amazing Grace, and then we thought thought about everything we found out about Grace. The first thing I did was thought about what we'd learnt about Grace as a character, and we went over all the things that we know about her. We found out she likes making up stories, she likes watching the ballet, and she has lost her 2 front teeth. How did we find that out?
Because you can tell in the picture.
You can see it in the picture, can't you? Now, today, we're going to read another story. And then we read the first 2 pages of Grace and Family. It's one of the books which is recommended by the Power of Reading project. The books which they have recommended have always really engaged the children and got them thinking about a lot of issues and ideas that come out of books. Grace lived with her ma and nana and a cat called Pawpaw. Using text like this helps you to deal with a lot of the issues which the children might have inside their heads but have maybe never really had an avenue or a voice to say it. Guess what? Your papa sent the money for 2 tickets to visit him in Africa for the Easter holidays. Nana says she'll go with you if you want. She had made up so many fathers for herself, she had forgotten what the real one was like. Okay, I'm not going to read anymore. I think that's a great way to use a text, is that you don't dive in and use the whole book straight away, because it means that the children are also really looking forward to what's going to happen next. Does anybody have any ideas as to what we could add now to our chart? Have we found out anything new about Grace? Rachel?
Her papa split up with her mum.
Brilliant.
And then he went back to Africa. Her father lives in Africa, so she doesn't really get to see him. She had 2 tickets from her father to go to Africa.
I wrote a really short diary entry as Grace before she got the tickets from her father. And it just was a way of getting the children to start thinking about getting into role and writing diary entries. Because although we've done it before this year, it is a relatively new idea for them. So I wanted to show them a model of it first before we started to write our own. We thought about how Grace would be feeling getting the plane ticket, and the children were put into pairs. One of you is Ma, and one of you is Grace. And they were reenacting the moment when Grace's mum gave her, or her ma gave her the ticket. How would she be feeling inside about getting this ticket? I want you to also show me on your face how you're feeling. Looking around the room, you could really tell that the children were thinking about it a lot just by what they were doing with their faces. Feeling very shocked. I think using the plane tickets in the picture was a good way of starting them off, getting them to think about it, actually doing something that was happening in the story. So how's she's feeling about going to visit her dad in Africa?
Happy, shocked, happy, bit sad, excited, a little bit confused.
Confused, what a great word.
So, what would you teach next to this Year 2 class? You've got 1 minute to tell the person next to you what you would do as that Year 2 teacher.
Well, I think what I would do is, they've done the writing together, haven't they? Yeah. And they did work to together, so you could then move them on forward to write independently, write their own independent diary.
They don't share it and they role play.
They've shared it, they've role played it, so now they're ready to independently write.
Thanks, everyone. Tanya, tell us what you might teach next.
Well, we were just saying that they've worked together and they've worked on doing the diary entry together and role-playing it. And I think I'd probably move to, they could independently write their own entry for the diary, working on that.
Very nice. Thank you very much, because the children already know that genre, that text type, so they can focus now in more detail about the message that they want to put into the diary, because they're not caught up in the form. Thanks very much. So to finish off, to summarise, We've got lots of research now that tells us that successful teachers of communication, language and literacy and English use high levels of interaction in their teaching. We've tried to demonstrate today to you a range of interactive techniques for you to use. David Ray from the University of Exeter, when he did this work about successful teachers of literacy, talks about the importance of embedding your teaching in meaningful texts. We know that the best teachers of English and literacy and communication, language and literacy are teachers who know a lot about children's books, get a buzz about children's literature going in their classroom. You've also got to have confidence and depth of subject knowledge, and that's been the aim of this session today, to deepen your subject knowledge. So thank you all for your contributions. And thank you, Sheena, for being my friend. Brilliant. That's excellent. I hope the students today take away the key message that literacy is central to the primary curriculum. Everything that primary teachers do is predicated on children's ability to speak and listen and to read and write. And we want the next generation of teachers to be really skilled at teaching, reading, writing, speaking and listening. If teachers are not knowledgeable about the process of reading, there's a tendency that they're merely technicians, rather than really understanding the process and being able to respond to children's individual needs in relation to learning to read.